First things first, I wanted to welcome all of our attendees to our latest installment of our Incidentally Informed webinars. Thank you once again for joining us. The topic today is the recent changes that we're seeing in the insurance coverage market with regard to cyber insurance policies and the effect that's having, if any, on incident response. Joining me today are Allison Clark of Baker Hostetler and Gwen Chudik of AXA XL. Allison is a member of the Digital Risk Advisory and Cybersecurity team at Baker Hostetler, and she provides strategic counsel to hundreds of clients across various industries in preparing for and responding to data security incidents. Gwen Chudik is the team leader of the AXA XL Incident Response Team for North America, and is a leading practitioner, a leading member of the cybersecurity insurance team in the United States. Thank you both for joining us. I'm going to kick it off by asking, I'll start with you, Gwen. What policy and coverage changes have you seen in the market in reaction to what I'll call the swath of claims that occurred over the past couple of years?
Yeah, I think it's no secret that the biggest fear of any company and probably any carrier at this point is ransomware. So over the last couple of years, there was an incredible surge in demands. It started out many years ago that it was maybe $50,000 for a ransom. It was so low that it was just a blip on the radar, not even a blip on the radar. And then in the years following that, maybe I want to say 2018, 2019, 2020, we started seeing just astronomical ransoms where the ransom alone was millions and millions of dollars. And it wasn't just the ransom payment, it was the recovery and the business income losses associated with the ransomware when they are locking up your systems and, business comes to a screeching halt. For some companies that could be millions of dollars a day. So the next turn was to do double extortion. So you can get your way out of the lockup, but now you have to pay us nonetheless because we've stolen all your sensitive data. We're going to leak it out to your clients or to your business partners. And so it was, very, inundated with ransomware. And 2022 has been quiet. There's a lot of speculation on why it's been quiet on the ransomware front, but we've seen the market also, companies across the globe, as well as governments across the globe, reacting to this ransom issue. And I think maybe that has caused it slow, but it's because people are becoming more aware of the scourge of ransomware, and insurance companies are looking at it more as, we have to tackle this issue. We have to get our insureds ready. So, before an event, helping them understand that, you need to be thinking about this, well before an event happens, and you need to have better security. So there's a lot of changes in the market, and just being able to get a policy, you have to meet certain strict standards. There are specific standards related to ransomware questionnaires and applications. And then in terms of coverage, what we've seen, the shift to tackle this issue is, a lot of cyber carriers are having particular endorsements on the policy, increased self-insured retentions or deductibles that, some folks may call. They are raising the limits. They are limiting the coverage. There are some carriers that have kind of stepped out of the market and said, we just don't want to do this anymore. It's not profitable for us, and we're going to focus our attentions elsewhere. So that's one huge change that we've seen in the market over the last couple of years, was a response to this. And then also changes with respect to the business income losses and trying to get arms around how to best tackle that and see what we can do to better help our insureds prepare for and recover from these events.
Thanks, Gwen. And Allison, are you seeing insureds that are having challenges responding to incidents because of varying coverage provisions in their policies? Are they limiting their response because certain things aren't covered, or are they changing the way they behave because there are sublimits or copays or increased self-insured retentions or deductibles?
That's a great question. So, Gwen mentioned ransomware, and one of the tools to combat the impact of ransomware is to conduct security assessments and incident response planning proactively before an incident happens. And so one of the primary challenges we've seen for those in IT specifically is trying to convince those C-suite level executives of the value of proactive services like security assessments and incident response planning, both of which Baker Hostetler does provide. These services are often not covered under a cyber policy, although there are certain carriers that may offer a credit or discount later on down the line if those, plans have been implemented. We've also seen clients that proceed without coverage. And so one of the most pressing issues after a cybersecurity incident, particularly ransomware, is that time is of the essence. So those without coverage and perhaps that incident response plan may have difficulties in lining up qualified, experienced experts like forensic investigators, cybersecurity counsel. And one of the benefits of cyber coverage is that there are on-panel experts, including legal and forensic investigators, often with reduced rates, who can be deployed basically with one call to your broker.
Thanks, Allison. So Gwen, there's been a lot of talk in the market about there really being what many people are calling a hard market in cyber right now. The last hard market that we experienced in the insurance industry at all was after 9/11, which lasted about 12 to 18 months, depending on product line. Do you have any sense of how long you think the current hard market, at least in cyber, may last? I mean, I'm starting to hear stories of market competition getting fiercer, policies being renewed on a flat rate rather than with an increase, carriers competing for specific risks. Do you have a sense of what's happening from Access perspective?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, everybody's been talking hard market. And, it's been the hot topic of 2022. There is some trend seeing that softening. And I think for the many of the reasons that you just said, there's high competition. But one of the trends that we're seeing, it's not just about who has the best price for a premium. Mm-hmm. We are seeing a trend to a lot of companies are looking at the carrier that they're going with in terms of reputation and service. One of the things that's very distinct about cyber policies is that you're buying a service. It's not just coverage. And so, there may be, companies that are more willing to pay a high premium because they know that the service that they're going to get is going to be a higher level of service. And so I think it's a hard market. We're going to see it soften a little. We're going to see high competition. But I also think that even though that there's a high market, the insureds are just getting, those companies and organizations looking for insurance are getting smarter about the product that they're buying and, the services that they're going to get with it. So that's unique. And I think it's a pretty cool trend.
Thanks, Gwen. Allison, have you seen your clients or Baker Hostetler's clients actually taking active steps to prepare to apply for insurance in order to make it more likely that they will be able to qualify for a policy? And if so, are there other companies that are making a different choice, i.e., they may be engaging in risk hardening, but they're doing that so that as a preparation for not buying or not renewing a policy? Like, is there a distinction there or some sort of indicator as to which way companies may go? Are there industry specific trends that you're seeing, or any kind of identifiable trends as to who's buying and who's not?
That's a great question. So, with the increase in media coverage for these high-profile catastrophic business losses due to cybersecurity attacks, I think it's on a lot of people's minds these days. And as Gwen mentioned earlier, we have been seeing an increase in requests for proof of security standards to even access coverage. And so I think that that's another factor that's driving the awareness and the uptick that we've seen also in proactive services. And so we emphasize, the importance of these proactive services like developing an incident response plan and conducting security assessments. And so, as an added layer of complication that I wanted to mention, the facts that attacks on managed service providers remains prevalent. That is one of those subsets of cybersecurity attacks that affects the way companies behave. And that means that not only do companies have to protect themselves, they must also take responsibility to ensure that their vendors, customers, and partners are taking similar steps as well.
And I mean, CyberClan does provide pre-breach risk management services like penetration testing, vulnerability assessments, incident response planning, disaster response planning. We have found certainly over the past 3 or 4 years that has been quite a hard sell. The bigger portion of our revenue for the past however long, 5 years at least, has been in incident response. And now that's starting to shift. Are you seeing a shift in the appetite of the average client / insured in terms of actually buying risk management services? I mean, we also operate a security operations center, so we can install a managed service on a client's environment and monitor and defend that environment 24/7, 365. And that, again, we have often sold that on the back of an incident response because it's easier to get clients to buy a managed service product once they've had an incident and once they recognize how challenging those incidents can be. And then they're willing to say, we don't want that ever to happen to us again. We are starting to see clients buying into or purchasing managed security services from us without having had an incident. Are you starting to see that kind of thing being driven by pricing, apprehension of risk, or perception of risk? Is that, I mean, it seems that way for us. Does it seem that way for you as well?
Absolutely. So we have certainly seen an uptick in the interest in proactive services. As I mentioned, as proof of security standards becomes a more common requirement for access to cyber coverage. And it's a bit of a balance, I think. In these difficult economic times, we are seeing some companies focus on what they perceive may be more pressing needs, personnel, customer retention, things of that nature. Cuts need to be made, and rightly or wrongly, as you mentioned, if a company hasn't lived through that cybersecurity incident, the need to invest in proactive security measures and cyber insurance may not make the top of that priority list during these times of triage. But there's also, a certain attitude of it won't happen to me in terms of cybersecurity incidents. Some companies don't necessarily view themselves as high value targets, while others may not think that they have data in their network that a cybersecurity criminal may be interested in. But we've seen time and again that the vast majority of cyber attacks don't appear to be targeted. The threat actor groups really trawl the internet for open ports and other means of easy access into a victim's network in a more indiscriminate fashion. And so on the other side of that, some companies view themselves as impenetrable, but even with the most sophisticated protections in place, companies can't always protect themselves from that one random employee clicking that phishing link. So I think that people are becoming more hungry for those proactive services and taking a hard look at the data in their network and whether or not it's secure. And so all of that really is to emphasize the importance of seeing, robust cybersecurity practices, including obtaining insurance coverage as value adds.
Right. And Gwen, just to pick up on Allison's point, I mean, one of the challenges we've had in selling risk management services is, I think, a perception among the vast majority of even the insurance buying companies, and we do have, I think, a market penetration problem with cyber insurance. I mean, it's certainly in the Fortune 1000 ranks, the market penetration is excellent, but below that, certainly it falls off precipitously. Are you seeing more perception of the level of risk, or are you seeing companies in the kind of mid-market space who are looking at cyber insurance risks and actually assessing the level of risk to them as a member of a specific industry or an industry group or a specific industry area, technology, professional services, manufacturing, whatever it may be. Are companies becoming more mature in their assessment of the risk that they may be attacked and or the assessment of that risk over a period of time? I mean, certainly we have looked at the rates of attack and the length of time to attack for any given company. And in a lot of ways, we've started saying to our clients, look, this is not an if question anymore. This is a when question. And I said this to when we were preparing, it's a bit like being a motorcycle rider. It's not if you crash, it's when. So are we starting to see companies mature in their perception of the risk, that they're going from an if we're attacked to a when we're attacked, and is that then changing their behavior in terms of insurance buying or preparation?
Well, I think that, like Allison said, it's sometimes it's not fully targeted. So that, it's not that the bad guys are saying, like, we really want to hit hard in the architectural space, and but it's not to say that they're not doing that. So a couple of years ago, we had a threat actor say, listen, we are not going to attack hospitals. So if you get hit and you're a hospital, let us know. I mean, it's telling because they don't necessarily know that they've hit a hospital, but they are aware of the industry that they're hitting and, trying at least to avoid it. But sometimes it's unavoidable because, as Allison said, they're just looking for open ports. They're looking for a vulnerability. There are certain industries that, and even if happenstance you get caught, the ramifications are just insurmountable. Like infrastructure clients that either that we may have could have just disastrous ramifications. One of the things that I think is important to realize is that while I agree that people are looking at their industries and they're looking at their organizations and saying, are we at risk for getting hit either targeted or by happenstance? Companies are very aware of that. But even if they aren't self-aware of that, the government and regulators are becoming more and more aware of it, and reaching out to say, passing, various regulations saying you need to have a certain standard of security protocols. You have to handle data in a certain way. More states are moving towards laws like CCPA, where they're saying, like, you have to know your data, and you have to, let the public be aware of what you're doing with the data, and, making it harder for people to ignore the risks that are associated with these, vast events. I think another thing that we're seeing too are that, again, with the regulators, even if you're not self-aware, there is a strong push to make sure that the vendors that you're doing business with are adequately secured and have good cybersecurity and hygiene in terms of cyber, and that they are taking the risk seriously. There are some businesses that may refuse to do business with you if you don't meet certain standards, and that's the nature of the world that we live in. So I do see companies becoming more self-aware, but I do also see a trend that sometimes they just don't have a choice. And so that's, it's a good thing, because everybody is starting to get, it's starting to get a place where it means something and it's important. And whether or not you're a large enterprise or a small market, the risk is there. I think for small markets, the risk that if you don't have cyber insurance and an event hits, it could be that you have to close your doors. There have been a couple of recent articles. I think a university had to close its doors after a cyber incident just because it was too impactful and they couldn't recover from it. So, and then you have large enterprise companies that, while many are happenstance, large enterprise could be a targeted hit and could be somebody in your system for a long time, and then dropping the bomb, which is a bomb that's, double-digit $1 million in terms of a ransomware. And so, yeah, be self-aware, but force others to be self-aware as well, I think.
And Allison, we've seen a bit of a trend lately with regard to some of the regulators focusing on CISOs and their efforts to engage their organizations in purchasing cyber insurance, and also engaging in cybersecurity and cyber awareness training, on a holistic scale. That has, to date, fallen almost exclusively on the CISOs as a responsibility, but you're starting to see, at least it appears, a trend towards making that a responsibility of not just the CISO, but the entire board. Are you getting inquiries from clients about that kind of thing? And is this becoming more of a board level issue? And I guess my next question is, as we head into a potential recession, are we going to see, or do you think we will see a retrenchment in terms of spending on cybersecurity awareness and preparation, just because it's farther down the pecking order from whatever else is keeping corporations' attention?
That's a great question. So I think with the advancement and the sophistication of cybersecurity incidents, all of that responsibility falling to one person is just honestly too much to bear, I think. So I do think that the trend is towards more people becoming responsible for certain aspects of the decision plan. And that is one of the reasons why it's so critical to have an incident response plan in place. So you know who you've identified those key players before an incident occurs, because as I mentioned previously, time is really critical in the aftermath of a cybersecurity incident. With the widening of responsibilities to the rest of the board, it's important to identify who is responsible for, negotiating and paying a ransom if that's needed, who's responsible for assessing the viability of your backups. And so having all of those key players identified at the beginning is key. And the second part of your question will we see a retrenchment in spending on services like this? And I hope that webinars like this bring to the attention of everyone watching, and everyone tell your friends how important it is to think about these issues critically, because as Mikkel mentioned, it's not a matter of if, but when, and that is a mantra in our industry for sure. So we want to be sure that we see this as an important value add to alleviate and mitigate any potential harm that may arise from when you experience an incident. So even if there is, all that to say is, even if there is, a swing back towards, well, it may not happen to me, and people become complacent, then because they have other worries and things to think about. I would like to emphasize that this is certainly something that should remain at the top of the priority list.
And I certainly agree with you there, although I do think we're in a bit of a wave pattern where claims will go up, the spending on preventive measures goes up, and then the claims fall off, and that's what happens to the spending. And oh, by the way, we're in a recession, so it falls off even more. And then guess what? Oh, the claims are going to go up again. I mean, it's just right. That. My guess is that's where we're headed, and it is a guess. But now, Gwen, just picking up on what Allison said, one of the services that we've had a bit of an increase in demand for is tabletop exercises, and they're great for preparation and helping clients prepare to understand the kinds of decisions that need to get made within a ransomware or other cybersecurity incident. And certainly what we're seeing is some of our clients who are doing this sort of thing will then turn around and tell their insurer, hey, we've done this, can we renegotiate the premium? And I know that there are a variety of carriers that are offering incentives to insureds to engage in risk management or risk hardening, because obviously the insurers see that as essentially an investment in protecting their book. But one of the issues that I have seen and that has been communicated to us is that even where insurers offer incentive programs like that, the take-up rates on those programs are, to coin a phrase, woefully low. Are you seeing any sort of engagement or a better level of engagement in that kind of thing where incentives are offered for companies to engage in risk management or risk hardening prior to having an incident?
I think that it vastly differs from carrier to carrier, and really, the incentives tend to be not so much you get lower premium. In this market, it tends to be, will you get renewed on your policy? Because even though you had an incident, even though if you haven't had an incident, it may be that you don't meet the higher standards to get the policy renewed. It is changing, like I said at the very beginning, that the standards and protocols to actually get a policy are going to be stricter and stricter. And so it's a tough situation because it tends to be harder to get cyber insurance. But as you said, the market penetration, there's an issue there. The people that should have it don't have it. And then, people that want it maybe not are in a place where they can get a policy because they don't meet these standards. And so the incentive really is, at the end of the day, not, avoiding these issues and being properly prepared for an event, not only from an insurance perspective in that you have a policy that will help alleviate this, but also from, very practical perspective is that, you understand, what could happen and what might happen, and then understand how to best prepare for that. If you live in a flood zone as a company, it's a disaster that is very probable and it could happen. And if it does happen, how do you recover from that? How do you maintain business? It's kind of like second nature. And this is the exact same thing. Cyber should be second nature. You should have a plan in place if that disaster hits, that everybody knows what their job is and everybody knows what they need to do to keep the business afloat. Nobody's going to come at you and say, oh, the flood was your fault. You made it rain. But it happens in cyber, this disaster hit and it's, you're the victim of a crime, but it's your fault. And that happens often. And so you need to be prepared for these discrete issues that happen. I think, the thing with pre-incident services is that, like you said, the uptick it can be small, but I think that's on, building those relationships with your carrier ahead of time to understand, what's available to you and why it's important, and work with the carrier to understand how to put those things in place. And it's that level of service that I talked about. You buy a product and the service is there, and you should absolutely take them up on it. If it's there, take it, because you get in contact with your vendors ahead of time, you get prepared, and, an incident that could last, 4 weeks because you're better prepared, is an incident that, you're recovering in maybe a week or 2 weeks time. So, and it's building upon all the right people. I think, Allison, you're right. People are always like, it's the CISO's job, it's the IT's job, and it's not. It's everybody's job. It's the whole company working together. And the more that you're prepared, the better understanding you have on whose role is what and how to impact the response based on that role. So it was a long-winded answer to say that I think it's absolutely imperative. And whether or not there's incentives that you get maybe, $10,000 less in your premium or not, it's really important to undertake these very important standards and steps ahead of time.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you, Gwen. Thank you. And I think too, the thing that, or the response that we often get when we say to companies, do you want to have some risk management services, is, oh no, our IT department is taking care of that. And I am often at pains to say to them, look, that's not their job and that's not their role. And frankly, you're putting them in a very difficult position if you're asking your IT department to also be in charge of risk management, because the IT department's job, for the most part, is to say yes. Right? Their job is to keep the lights on, keep the computers running, make sure everybody can do their job, make sure everybody has access to the stuff that they need in order to do their job. So 95% of the time, their job is to say yes, because people go to them every day. Can I do this? Can I do this? Can I do this? Can I email this to so-and-so? Can I get access to that? And the pressure on them to say yes to all of those requests continually erodes the security levels that any organization has in place. And so the risk manager's job, and frankly, the external risk management team's job, if you have one, is to say, no, you can't have access to that. You don't need it to do your job. No, you can't go in without coming in through a VPN and use an RDP port instead. Why? Because RDP ports are the number one vector for ransomware attacks that don't originate from an email that somebody clicks on erroneously. You need somebody either in the organization or external to the organization. And in my opinion, external is better, because you need someone to say, no, you can't have permission to do that. No, you can't set up your network that way. It's too risky. And right now, in large part, or it has been the insurers who are starting to say, no, you can't have insurance because your network is a mess. No, we won't write that policy because you have huge risk with your open RDP ports. Or no, you can't have 100% coverage for the full limits for ransomware because you're at risk and you won't do anything actively to mitigate the risk. So I do think there is a place for the risk management side of IT, and I often think that's probably best to be an external service provider, because it's easier for the external service provider to come in and say, that needs to change, that needs to get fixed. You can't set up that network that way. It's too risky. Because the IT department's job is to say, yeah, we can make that happen.
But I think really it's a different set of skills and expertise.
Yeah.
People
100%.
are always saying, people often act like their IT is a one-stop shop. And like you said, their job is to keep the business afloat and do the day-to-day. The people that you bring in for these incident response and the cyber consultation, ahead of an incident, are people that are experts in dealing with these highly volatile crisis situations and very complicated pieces of malware, very complicated cyber events. If you ask somebody in IT in, some small town somewhere, have you ever had a ransomware? They're like, absolutely not. I have no idea what to do to recover from a ransomware event. And it's a totally different skill set, and it's one that really needs to be driven home. And it's the same for general counsel in a lot of these companies. It is often general counsel as a one-stop shop. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to crisis response in cyber, it's a totally different skill set than what you're doing on the day-to-day on in-house counsel. And you really need to step outside of that and understand that we need these outside experts, to your point, to come in and really help out. Yeah. Allison, for you, I'm sure that I saw you shaking your head. I think they're probably pretty on point there.
Yes, I agree with everything that both of you have said. And, sometimes it takes that external voice to say, that is not a safe thing to do, to either further emphasize what your IT is already telling you, to get the attention of those who are making those decisions.
Well, and of course, if you say to your IT department, are we protected? Their instinct is always going to be to say, oh yeah, sure we are. Because in asking them that question, what you're really doing is telling them that it's their job to make sure the answer to that question is yes. So you're never going to have them say, oh no, we're at risk. I've never once in 10 years in this industry heard an internal IT department say, oh yeah, we're at risk. But even after they get attacked.
I have.
Oh yeah, you okay? Fair enough.
Where they've said, I don't know how many times I've told our
we gotta implement MFA.
Yes, we have to do all these things, and this is please just give us the the budget that we need to do this, and it falls on deaf ears, obviously, and they're very apparent about it. They're very transparent that this is a risk to us, and you need to invest in us, and it's so sad. I feel so bad for some of the IT folks that are just saying, please help me.
So Allison, you had mentioned earlier that you are starting to see some clients who don't buy insurance. What are they doing instead? Like, are they just kind of putting their hands over their eyes and Peter Panning it into, first start of the right and straight on till morning? Or are they actually saying, well, we're going to take the money that we would have spent on buying an insurance policy and put that into risk management?
I would love to say that that latter scenario is what we're seeing, and on the other side of that, we may not be talking to those people who are simply covering their eyes and not, thinking about just keeping their fingers crossed and hoping that they won't be the victim of a cyber incident on their watch, So I kind of see it both ways.
Okay. And then just one of the kind of latter things that I wanted to talk about a bit, we've seen Lloyd's has introduced a new nation-state-backed cyber event exclusion, and Lloyd's has issued a bulletin mandating that all of their carriers who are engaged in issuing cyber insurance policies have to have that endorsement on their cyber policies starting in 2023. One of the things that I was interested in is how difficult is it going to be to apply an exclusion like that in terms of having any sort of agreement on attribution? I mean, is there any way to, have an ability to attribute a cyber attack to a given group or a given organization or a nation state affiliated organization? And is there enough proof ever to actually litigate that? Seems to me the answer, I mean, I have my own views on that, but
it's really a fascinating question. Yeah. And one we could develop a whole webinar on in and of itself. But really under the best of circumstances, attribution is largely a challenging thing to conclusively establish, as you mentioned. It's, further complicated by the fact that even quote unquote legitimate nation state attacks sometimes use third-party threat actors who are also carrying out their own cyber campaigns. So it's not like we'll be able to subpoena somebody and depose the, contracted threat group and ask them under oath if they're working on behalf of a nation state. So, while there's certain steps that we can take to ensure, that any, for example, ransom payment that's being made is not sent to a sanctioned group, that standard may not quite be the same as interpreting the contractual definition of a nation state backed cyber group for these policy exclusions. Although that could be a factor, whether law enforcement has attributed a certain attack to a nation state. So I think to a large extent, it remains to be seen. And one of the most significant factors will also be how are these exclusions going to be worded? Who will have the burden of proving such an exclusion applies? And some of the sample language that we've seen indicates that burden may be on the carrier to do so. And so, I think that is one of those things that is currently in flux.
Yeah, and there was a post on LinkedIn the other day about this subject, and one of the bigger Lloyd's MGAs has come out and said, look, we're not saying that we're going to exclude any and all potentially attributable nation state backed cyber attacks, but we're trying to limit our exposure to the obvious ones. But of course, as much as it's nice to say that in public, that's not what the exclusion says, right? And so you kind of look at that and say, that's very comforting, but ultimately a court's not going to rely on that in interpreting an exclusion. They're going to rely on what the exclusion says, and probably nothing extraneous. So, that's nice marketing, but it doesn't affect the wording of the policy. Gwen, do you have any sort of any thoughts on nation state backed cyber attack exclusions and whether or not they'll be effective at all?
Well, the first thing I think about is that, when you buy a product, you expect delivery on that product. And so the mindset should be, we are going to deliver that product. And under a very rare circumstance is where our hands are tied, where we just can't, that we have to say no. And usually in that scenario, it's a very clear no. Like, for example, your policy specifically says we will not cover, water damage, and it's very obviously water damage. And so under that, you'd say, we'd love to give you coverage for that, but you knew when you bought the policy that it just wasn't available to you. this is an area I think that is very gray. I think the attribution is really hard. I think it does help when you have a overarching governmental entity flagging entities and saying this is a sanctioned entity. For example, with OFAC, when they make clear designations of these are sanctioned terrorist or nation state groups, and it's easy to say it's been it's been blocked. We can't do anything with that. But at the end of the day, you have these incredibly sophisticated and complicated attacks that the attribution seems to be very, very hard. You could have a nation state in your environment conducting espionage, just looking around and peeking at, what do you have in your information, and then selling off that, backdoor to the company to a threat actor group that's going to come in and, come in to do, under financial motivation to seek a ransom payment or lock you up on a ransomware attack. So you have initial entry of maybe a nation state, but then the ransomware that flowed from it is, a wholly different group. And so how do you say that this event is by this or by that, and who did this and who did that? I just think it's going to be very difficult, and one that I think that, some of the big brains in the industry are going to have to wrap their heads around it and really think about. We'll see how it comes to fruition, but I think at the end of the day, it's about delivering a product and making sure that, that we are providing the highest level of service to the clients that we insure.
And just on that point, it seems to me that just based on the way cyber insurance has developed over the past decade or so, there has, I think, been a trend in cyber that maybe is a bit different from the trends in other areas of coverage, where the cyber policies in place have always had what I would refer to as expansive coverage and very limited exclusions. And so I can count on one hand the number of scenarios I've seen where a cyber carrier is saying, no, that's not covered. And so I wonder if there is some of that, or there's some notion that, cyber policies have been perceived in a lot of ways to cover everything. And you've seen various cyber policies come out with, 8, 10 different coverage grants, whether it's ransomware or social engineering or fund transfer fraud or network interruption or whatever it may be. The coverage grants in the cyber policies that exist in the market today have gotten broader and broader and broader over the past 10 years or so. And the exclusions that are included in those policies have become narrower and narrower. And sooner or later, you've got a finite amount of money coming into the system, and the policies are providing more and more coverage, and as a result, money is going out of the system. Sooner or later, the money going out is larger than the money coming in, and that system falls down. And I think that's what's happened over the past couple of years. Are we seeing a rebalancing of that, or is it just a matter of, well, we need more money in the system?
I think there's definitely a rebalancing. I don't think that the coverage is going to remain broad, and it's been pretty restricted. For all the reasons that we discussed at the top of the call, the hard market and so forth, and the risks associated with cyber events. You also have an industry that is maturing and understanding the risk in a lot better way than they had 10 years ago. Cyber is so unique in that there's not a canon of law. There's not a book that's been established for 100 years on how to address this issue. It's all relatively new in all aspects of law, technology, and risk. And so as we are maturing as an industry, we are getting better at writing the risk. And so it becomes more reasonable, I think, for everybody. So for example, social engineering, social engineering in terms of like a cyber crime, so to speak, you're phishing, you're spear phishing, those sorts of things. It is crafted very particularly in many policies, is that you have this coverage, yes, You have to buy it under a separate endorsement. It doesn't come under the, standard package. And even if you buy it under the separate endorsement, there are going to be some standard protocols that you need to take in place to have coverage. For example, did you verify that the ACH instructions that you were asked to be changed by email were verified by a phone call? Do you have a callback procedure? Do you have a procedure in place? And, a lot of times that, coverage isn't available because even if they do have a policy in place, it's not followed. Yep. And so, so if you send a wire of $100,000 out, if you didn't follow that procedure, it's very clearly not covered. It's not like attribution. Yeah. Like this is, did you or did you not do X? And
can you document it?
Yes, and can you document it? Yeah. And so, it's just smarter. It is more restrictive. You certainly want to read your policy and understand ahead of time. And that's why I think those pre-incident calls are so important, is that, yes, you have a policy, but you need to understand, there are certain things that you're going to have to keep in mind as, you're conducting business as usual, which might impact coverage on, should an event occur.
Right. And Allison, maybe after this we'll wrap it up because we're getting close to the top of the hour. Are you seeing insureds and clients engaging in what Gwen referred to as pre-incident calls? Are they calling you and saying, can we get things set up? Can we meet the vendors? Can we make sure that we have an open level of communication, or at the very least an introduction, so we know who we're dealing with should we have a problem?
This particular year, I have actually received several of these calls. I think with the general awareness and the hope that webinars like these reach people's ears far and wide, people are, seeing the importance of these services, and and they're taking proactive steps to mitigate against any future damage. And so if we're going to bottom line, the key takeaways of today's presentation, it's to view implementation of adequate cybersecurity measures, not simply as a prerequisite to accessing cyber markets, but really also as an investment and acknowledgement of the value of effective cybersecurity management. And, not to panic. There's a whole host of qualified experts out there ready to help.
Yeah, so I wholeheartedly agree. And that's one of the reasons I asked both of you to join us, because of course, you two are some of the leading experts in the area. Thank you again for joining us. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you both about this. Thank you for your additions to the industry and your additions today. We're going to wrap that up. If you have anybody who's in attendance, if you have questions that you didn't get a chance to ask, or you didn't want to ask in a public forum, please feel free to email any one of us. All of our email addresses are public. I'm sure that Allison would be more than happy to offer you advice, as would CyberPlan. So we look forward to hearing from you in the future. Thank you for attending. Allison and Gwen, thank you very much for being here. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate your time. Thanks, everyone.